Coming to you live around the world from NOV's Studio 202. This is Inside Out Horizons. With your hosts, Lydia Mabry, Jeremy Griswold, Cass Casey, and Shelby Dumaine. Now, let's start the show.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching from. Welcome to the show. We are live right now. You are watching Inside Out Horizons. This is the show where we talk with energy industry professionals about get their insight and bring it out to you. We have a really excellent guest today. I'm really excited for that. We are live right now, as I mentioned. So if you are just now tuning in, welcome to the show, and feel free to leave any comments. At the end of the episode, we will be doing a live Q&A with our special guests. So if you leave those comments, you'll have the chance to be featured on the show. I don't want to delay too much more, but once again, I wanted to say again, leave those comments wherever you're watching from, and we will answer those at the end. So without further ado, I want to bring it over to our host for the day, Mai Belmar, and she's going to tell you more about our guests.
Thanks, Shelby. Excited to be here on the program today and welcome two of our guests. Would love to actually include and talk a little bit more about their backgrounds. We have two individuals, first being Massiel Diez and Jamie Elrod. Massiel comes with us with a vast background with over 10 years of experience, starting off as a chemical engineer, as a field intern turned wireline open hole field engineer. Her background is fantastic out in the field space, taking it and leading it to what her role is today in business development for Schlumberger. Then we have Jamie Elrod, who's had 10 years of successful experience in the sales, working her way up in the ladder, selling everything from bits, wireline, drilling, and you have her today with our early engagement manager for Baker Hughes. Two wonderful folks that have started and pioneered a wonderful program called Flipping the Barrel, a successful podcast empowered to tell the stories of a women's perspective in oil and gas. Welcome to the show, Massiel and Jamie.
Here, really quick, Maya, I'm going to interrupt real quick. We're having some technical difficulties with the audio, so we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. If you're watching live, stay tuned, and we will be right back once we fix this audio issue. Thank you. All right, hello, we're just checking back while we have the mics to see if they're working. Jamie, Massiel, can y'all hear us?
Very well, yes.
Okay, great. I think we're going to continue on. So back to you, Mai, if you're watching. Thank you for bearing with us. And let's continue on with the show.
Great. Hey, great example of a live program and a live show. Exactly. We always got to roll with it, you guys.
That's right.
I'll start off with our intro again. Definitely deserving of a story. We have two wonderful guests on our program today. First being Massiel Diez with over 10 years of experience, starting off as a chemical engineer. She was a field intern turned wireline open hole engineer, working with Schlumberger up the ladder, really understanding what's happening out in the field, what's happening out in this space, and now excited to talk about her role and her position in business development for Schlumberger. We also have Jamie Elrod, who comes in with a decade of experience in sales. Not to mention your early experience, not only as a retail salesperson, but being inspired by oil and gas. And through that, being able to work up the ladder as one of the top performing sales professionals in her business. Everything from bits to drilling to wireline, you name it, she understood it. And they both came together and understood the power of what their voice could be in the oil and gas industry. Together, they paved the way to develop a phenomenal podcast called Flipping the Barrel, and through that have empowered the stories of energy leaders everywhere. Welcome to the show, Massiel and Jamie. We're excited to have you guys here today.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I could spend all morning. I actually did. I spent a majority of my morning talking about your history. So impressive because not only are you bringing field experience to the table, but you're using really your marketing savviness to talk about a subject that matters and is passionate about both of you. I want to talk about Flipping the Barrel, a phenomenal podcast joining the stories of energy leaders and questions about what you guys have in this space with a woman's perspective. Will you guys give us a little bit of a taste of how this came to be? I certainly know this story. It's a power of Instagram. It's a power of husband empowerment, right? But I want to tell the story of how Flipping the Barrel came to be for you two.
Well, thank you so much for having us on the show. And I guess I'll take the lead here since it was my husband who actually reached out to Massiel on Instagram. So a quite funny story, as Massiel will tell her angle. But Jason, my husband, he works in oil and gas as well. And he was scanning Instagram and found Massiel and messaged her off of a photo that she had posted at a lunch that she went to, a place where him and I usually go eat a lot, which is called Bella Green. And he messaged her and was like, "Oh, Bella Green, is that where you're at?" And Massiel, of course, was like, "This is a weird, message that I'm getting on Instagram." And then lo and behold, the conversation turned into, "Hey, you need to meet my wife." And so then I got in touch with Massiel through Jason calling me and being like, "Hey, there's this girl that I think y'all would be a great fit." And kind of odd, as you don't see that very much nowadays. Mm-hmm. And so I messaged Massiel, and then the rest is really history.
I love that story because you talk about social media and the power of social media. And this story is actually fairly young. You guys met in 2019, just a couple of years ago. And through that connection was able to spark something that was really unique. There's a power behind marketing, especially with your story. Massiel, you're not actually new to marketing. You've been telling your story as an engineer in this space for quite some time. How did you know that Flipping the Barrel through a podcast platform was the right program for both you and Jamie?
I don't think we necessarily knew at the beginning that this was going to be a hit or even that it would be successful. Like you mentioned, I've been doing this for a long time, but I had never tried a podcast. I had done YouTube, I had done Instagram, just different kinds of social medias, but it never kind of took off as much as this podcast. And I think it's because it was new in this space. Not a lot of people at that time were doing podcasts, especially in the energy sector. And it's something completely new that I think people were just intrigued by.
Yeah. With something new and being pioneers in the space, you got to ask yourself, what are some of the tribulations, lessons learned, failures that you probably went through to get where you are today? Any of those that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of times people have ideas and they don't get started, right? You craft it, you go on and on about making it perfect, and a lot of times you kind of let the timing pass. When Jamie and I decided and said, "Hey, let's just try this podcast," we didn't think about it. We didn't think about what are people going to think about us? What are we really going to do? We went online, we watched some Gary Vee, we YouTubed how to start a podcast. I mean, there's so many resources online, and we went on Amazon and just ordered it. What we decided to do at the beginning was like, let's just interview ourselves. We don't even know if we're good interviewees, and it turned out that we weren't that great. We went through a lot of Jamie and I would talk a lot about ourselves and say, like, we would always relate and be like, "Oh, I did that too. And then people would say, like, it's not about you guys, it's about the guest. So, there's a lot of tribulations that we definitely went to try to craft it.
Sure.
I would say if you went back to our first interview, Massiel and I actually video ourselves while we were talking. And it is a very interesting conversation that we've had. And I would say that her and I are very extroverted and we talk a lot. And so we would talk a lot about things that meant nothing. And so there was a lot of stuff that we learned about ourselves as well along the way. And we also realized that we had to take, constructive criticism in a positive way and turn it around and make something of it. And that's how we ended up developing where we're at today with the podcast. Is we were not perfect at the beginning. I mean, we're still not perfect, and we're still growing as we continue to interview people and learn new ways. And just to share another one is we never did it virtual until COVID. So we used to have to do it in a studio, and we couldn't wrap our minds around doing anything virtual, as I think a lot of the people in the world today now do everything virtual because of COVID. But it really pushed us to learn how to interview, on the computer screen and not having that guest with us. And so I think that was really a game changer for Flipping the Barrel.
I think that's really smart. When I think about how you guys started, some of your first programs were September of 2019. That was like right at the start of when the world started to change. When you started to reach out to folks and deciding upon what Flipping the Barrel was going to be, you had to have considered who were going to be your guest. Today, when you look at some of the Rolodex of names, it is an incredible list of individuals and spearheaders in the energy space. In the very beginning, however, it was really kind of difficult to get your name out there and build credibility. Can you share with us sort of the strategy behind who you wanted on the show and the stories you wanted to tell?
I think when we first started, I'm sure in the back of our minds, we wanted CEOs at some point, right? I'm sure we were aiming high and saying, this is going to be an awesome podcast. We're going to have famous people on here. And I think that was initially the goal, but we knew that was going to take a while. So we started small. Let's interview our friends. Let's share different people's stories from the field, from mid-level careers. We weren't really focusing on CEOs at this time because we really thought there's no way they're going to come on our podcast, right? So we started small, and the first CEO that came on was the CNJ CEO, Dawn Gowick, that Jamie was able to get on because she worked there. And after that, it was just like a ripple effect. One CEO, introduced us to another CEO, and then the other CEO, and then it just became, okay, if one CEO was able to come on, it was like, I think I can do it too. It took one person, one CEO to say yes to us, and then it just kind of made it like normalized, like he normalized it and said, it's okay, you guys can go on this podcast too.
And I think too, him having the opportunity to come on in the way that we shared his story, it resonated with a lot of people, and they really loved how we were just really about the person and not about the company. So we've really tried to strive on giving the history behind how that individual got into oil and gas, who their mentors were, diversity and inclusion. We really work hard on the questions and developing that around each person individually. And I think that's really what made more and more people comfortable to come on and then see kind of, how we approach it differently than the normal podcast would, or just highlighting, the company they work for. We really try to take the company out of it and just keep it about the person.
I think that's a really good segue into really the idea of adaptability in the space. In a past interview, Jamie, you really gave your prominence and respect towards your father and the upbringings of your coaches, and talked about the ability to be coachable, to be adaptable in this space, because things are constantly pivoting. When I think about the people that you've talked to and the impact that they're making by telling their story, you're absolutely right. There's a humanized aspect to what energy is about. And it doesn't just start with a barrel. It starts with a human person making that change. Has there been a story or a person that has been impactful to you, something that you've learned along the way and could share with us that really resonated with you?
We've talked to so many people. I would say the biggest one is when we interviewed Celine, and she talked about work-life balance and finding your true north, which I think Massiel would totally align with me on this one too. We first never heard about your true north, or even there being a book, or even like you can YouTube it, there's YouTube videos on it. But it's really about defining what balance is for you, because everybody is so different that a balance for one person might be, hey, I like to work all day. Like, I like to work all day. I like to stay up all night. That's like my thing. Well, to them, that's their balance. And then to me, that might seem crazy. But that is what's different about each person. And that's what Celine really, elaborated on, was that it's not the same for everyone. And that to her balance is true to herself, and that makes her happy. So at the end of the day, it's all about being happy where you're at. And I think that really resonated with me, because as I look at what Massiel and I do, especially today with, now we both have a baby girl, and we do the podcast, and we have a full-time job, and we do things like this. And a lot of people on the outside would be like, oh my God, y'all are crazy. How do you do this? And for us, it brings a lot of joy and happiness. So it's not crazy for us. So I think that Celine really brought that realization to both of us, and really helped and guided us in, what really makes us happy. And no matter what other people think, it's important how we feel.
That's wonderful. What about yourself, Massiel? Any impactful stories that resonated with you?
Yes, definitely. For me, it was Stephanie Cox. She mentioned, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? And that's something that Jamie and I always go back to. And the event is one of the, ideas that we can talk about, where we just thought, let's do it. And that always came up with, like, what's the worst that can happen? Nobody comes. Or like five women come to our event, right? And I think a lot of time, fear is what holds everybody back from following their dreams, from taking the next job, from starting something. So I always go back to that quote and really think, what would I do this if I knew that I wouldn't fail and I would be successful? So and like Jamie said, there are so many amazing people that have come on our podcast. I really take something valuable out of everybody.
That's wonderful to hear, and to have that platform to tell that story. There is something wonderfully and beautifully unique about the way you tell that story. You truly build a program that says, come on, tell us about your background, what makes you tick, what makes you think, and we want to tell that story to your audience. There's an incredible level of impact that you're making as energy storytellers, not only in the profession that you do full time, but what you do offline as well. I'd love to talk about, you mentioned, Jamie, being mothers, being a mother in the workforce, being new mothers since last year. Congratulations to you both. How do you find a way to balance work, passions, being a mother, being a wife? And are there any tools or programs that maybe folks that are watching could lean into and learn more about?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to share. So when it comes to when I had Kylie, I would say that it changes your whole entire world and perception on life. And I'm sure all of my colleagues that I worked with in the past would attest to this, but I mean, I really put everything into my job. And it's not that I don't today, but now I just have rules to the way I work during the day. I know that my daughter goes down by 6:30, and I know that between when I get home and that 6:30 mark, I want to spend time with her. So I allot my time throughout the day to prioritize what means the most to me. And that's how I've been able to find happiness in doing all the work that we do, and still having time with my daughter. So between that time, I know that I want to spend and focus on her. And then she goes to bed so early that after that, I work on the podcast. I do other things. Massiel and I'll do calls at night. And so it's been really about, one, prioritizing throughout the day, and then two, not being scared to ask for help. You cannot do it alone. At first, I had a nanny, and I know that that's not always acceptable, and like not everybody can, afford to have that. But there is ways to get around it with like sharing nannies or sharing, in-home care. And then now she goes to a Montessori school, which honestly has been the best situation for us and the family, and she loves it. So it's really about not being scared to ask for help, and then also know that your children as well need that time with other people and other friends. So to not feel bad about not being with them all day, because at the end of the day, it's about the time that you spend with them and how you spend that time, not if you're there all day or not. So that's really how I've been able to accomplish, still working, still doing everything, and then also having that time with Kylie.
I love that you provide protected time for you and your family, and also an opportunity to be present. That's definitely something that, a lot of our viewers are working with, something myself I'm working with as well. And so to hear you say that as you're building an empire is really inspiring. Massiel, any tips from you? Again, brand new mother, congratulations, welcoming you to this world. A lot of new things happening. And how do you find the balance in your space?
I'll say it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't. I don't use any tools. I know that's something that people usually ask, like, do you have some sort of planner? And I'm not somebody that's organized, actually. I just kind of go with the flow. Like, I just take day by day as it comes, and I prioritize as it goes. Like Jamie, I also have a nanny. I ask for help. I also think that it's okay to normalize that as moms, like you are also your own identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember before we got pregnant or we decided to have kids, I would always see that and feel like, oh, it seems that when you have kids, you have to kind of let go of yourself. I have to give up on me. I have to give up on my dreams, on my career, because now I have a baby. Because it seems that that's just kind of like the path that I would look around. And I made it a point that when I would, have a baby, I was going to make it that I was important first. And that could look bad on some people and say, you're selfish, you should care more about your daughter. But I think if I can go to the gym that day for an hour, I will be a better mother because my mental health matters. And I went back to work earlier, right? I didn't use my full maternity leave, and people thought that was crazy too. But at the end of the day, it's my balance. It's what makes me happy. And I could be the best mom that I can possibly be because I was taking care of myself. And like Jamie, I prioritize time. I'm in part-time, and that was something that was really helpful with my company, was that I came in with, this is my plan. I want to come back early. I want to do part-time. I only want to do 20 hours a week. I want to get back into the business. And I say that to a lot of women, is just ask. And a lot of times you could be, they will help you out because they want you to be successful. So don't be afraid of asking for help and saying, this is what my schedule needs to look like for me to come back early because I want to work on my career. And, I just want to normalize that because Jamie and I go to events, we still do our podcasts, we go to the gym, we have our own lives. And people sometimes look at that and see like, well, you're not staying home with your kids. You're not a good mom, and we've had that.
Certainly. You got to say there's a balance that works for each family and each their own. It's working wonderfully for you both. As a mother of two, I don't think I've had a clean floor in 3 years. I think we live off of Legos and like old cereal on the ground. So I love to hear that there is a way to work and a way to live and a balance for you both. So that's incredible. I think about flipping the barrel in the podcast and the success of it. When we talk about success, what are some of the measurements of success that you guys value when you're thinking about your program and how and who you want to have on the show?
Yeah, I remember the first time when you asked us this, we were like, well, we really don't use metrics. What we really look at is how we're impacting those that are listening to us. So it's through the comments, it's through literally we get people that write us that are like, it's because of you that I decided to go work for Schlumberger, or it's because of you that I decided to stay in the field, or to even get a petroleum engineering degree, or, think differently about oil and gas. Even if it's just one person, to us, that's a success. And I think that's what's made the podcast grow so much, is that Massiel and I did not focus on, we need to have 1,000 downloads. We need to be successful. We need, sponsors. Like, we just did it because we wanted to just help at least one individual. And now we end up helping thousands of people, and people know about the podcast all around the world. And it's really just because of the way that we approached it and how we define success, which is really just touching those that listen, and then constantly providing new advice. And we do that through each guest. And we now make sure to also do pre-interviews. So we pre-interview our guests to make sure that we get the right story out of them, because what can happen is, depending on the personality type, they might be a little bit more introverted, and we want to make sure we draw out the stuff that really is important, because everybody has a great past, but we only can do that if we understand their past. So we pre-interview in order to pull that from them, and then we probe within the podcast itself, which that's why the content has become so rich recently, is because we do that. And I think that has really elevated the information we get from our guests, and also define who should come on the podcast. And then, also, grow within the outreach and the audience.
I love to hear that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the people you impact and the energy and space by which you want it to grow. Massiel, I know recently you opened up the forum and said, I want to be a mentor to folks. Who here need mentorship that I can lend my resources to? And someone that already has a packed schedule, got to be incredibly thankful for you to share your expertise out in the field. So I hear it. There's an authenticity, there's a purity to your story, both of you. And I think that really drives the success of Flipping the Barrel podcast. It is, again, telling the story of individual key energy professionals, but it's through your lens of a very human aspect. So I love how that resonated with you all. I got to flip it to something really fun in terms of, if it wasn't flipping the barrel, if it wasn't this podcast you guys were considering, there was a story that I found, Massiel, where you said, I would have a doggy daycare. I would open a doggy daycare. It would have coffee featured there. It would be called Happy Tales. Have you guys considered what your life would look like if it wasn't this podcast, if it wasn't the profession that you're currently in today?
I think it's a struggle that I have, I think my whole life, where I have a split personality of I want to be an entrepreneur, but at the same time, I love my career and I love being an engineer. And I it's like two paths that every day I'm like, okay, which side do I pick? But what I love about flipping the barrel is that you don't have to pick it. I can do both because they both kind of, work well together, and it gives me the creativity to be doing something different. So it's, I have a balance of where I have more of a strict career and kind of like the path that's already there for me. But then with flipping the barrel, I get my creativity to go out and be a, self-entrepreneur and to make it fun. So I still think about opening a coffee shop one day. I don't think that's ever going to go away, or even the dog daycare. It's just how my mind is wired. I'm always thinking of, an idea of what I could be doing.
I love that. If you have a perfected venti Tai Chi latte recipe, let me know. Jamie, what about yourself? Where did you see yourself? I certainly know growing up, you didn't imagine yourself in this. You knew you'd always be in sales, but you fell into oil and gas. What would you be otherwise?
It's interesting. Like, I have always loved sales and loved competition. So I knew that I would be doing something within this realm, because I love talking to people. I love making them happy with whatever we're selling or doing. So I knew it was going to be that. Oil and gas just fell in because it was so like, I didn't know what the world was like. It was so mysterious at the time. But I think that I would either have been working for myself, selling something that I created, which I've always thought, like, what could I create that I could actually sell? And I don't have that engineering mind, so I always revert to Massiel on that. But I think, I would probably be selling, who knows, healthcare. I haven't really thought about it because, the entrepreneur side that Massiel has mentioned, I feel like we fulfill it with the podcast, that I actually feel pretty good about the direction that we're going, and getting both sides of the coin. I don't regret it, or I kind of like where we're at.
Yeah. It's definitely a loaded question, because there's an opportunity for us to talk about, you're not just one person. You're not just a technical expert, and that is who you are, and that's your identity. Clearly, as you guys are on the show here today, we've talked about the right and left side of our brain, being able to be creative, being able to market and use the tools at your fingertips to lead into your passion, but also have a very technical background and do things that really feed you. So I love that there's two aspects to your identity, and that it's completely multifaceted in that respect. I've talked a lot with you guys. I love hearing my voice, but I've talked a lot with you guys. I'd love to hear what the audience has. Throughout the program, we've taken your questions. And Shelby, I'd love to kind of take it over to you and see if there's any questions that the audience has for our guest today.
Absolutely. We got some great ones already. And there's still time if you have any more questions. We'll be doing a Q&A for a few minutes. So you still got some time if you got some quick fingers on the keyboard there. But this first one comes from Ben on LinkedIn. And he asked, how did you adapt, and what strategy was adopted during the last oil and gas downturn, and what was the most important lesson learned? So thank you, Ben, for that question. What do y'all think?
So actually, Jamie and I both did a podcast on one of the downturns that we both went through in 2016, and I actually got laid off, and Jamie left her job because everybody else was getting laid off within that realm. So I think the same kind of concept came back during COVID, where I felt like we were a little bit more prepared because we're like, we've been through this. And I think a lot of folks in oil and gas are like, okay, we could do this again, right? It's like the fourth or fifth time for some people. My biggest lesson learned during the first downturn was it's good to have your personal brand, and not your only identity is the company that you work for. It's good to have a network outside of the company that you work with too, because a lot of people realize, like, oh, the only people that I know for the last 10 years are my coworkers or people within this family. And when a downturn comes, is really who you know, and getting work, so it's really for me, it was really realizing that you can work on your personal brand and have kind of like an outside life outside of work, so that when things like this happen, you have friends in different industries or in different companies that can come and help you out. And yeah, I would say that was our biggest lesson. And listen, nobody's safe during any downturn. Jamie and I were always going back and forth of, oh my gosh, we're next, right? I think that scaredness that everybody had was very real. And we weren't safe. We weren't sure if we were safe, but at least, we had been through it already. So it was kind of like, we've got this, even though we probably didn't got it, but we were like, we got this.
Mm-hmm. To add to what Massiel's saying, I would suggest that, if you go back and you look at my history, I have worked for a few different companies, all selling different products. And so my confidence level of being able to just move and switch was high. So I knew that due to the network that I've built, like if something was to happen, I would go at it and I would find another job. And I think it's also understanding yourself during that time, like what are my fears and overcoming those fears, because it's usually the fear of like, where am I going to go work? Nobody wants me. Like, how am I going to find another job? And you need to be able to always be prepared. I feel like you're never safe. No matter how great you are, you're always replaceable. So it's also good for you to understand like what your next step could be if the company you're at doesn't work out, because at the end of the day, the company still runs with or without you there. So it's a little bit of being humble as well on kind of like reality of what the situation is, a downturn or not. You still need to always have, I think, a plan B.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Absolutely. And this next one comes actually from a comment from Danny Salinas. He just started a podcast of his own called Upstream Calendar. So I wanted to kind of add on to that conversation. He said he really related to what y'all were saying about kind of starting a podcast. Do you have I would say, if you had one piece of advice for maybe someone wanting to start one, just starting one, especially in energy, it being kind of a niche space, what one piece of advice would you have for those folks?
I would say just do it. Just don't even think about it. That's my best advice. If you just even think about it for 2 seconds, you're not going to do it. And you have to start in order to get better.
I got asked this yesterday, and I told the lady that was asking me, I said, you just have to put your camera up, put your iPhone up, video yourself, and post it on YouTube. Just start. There's no guidelines. There's no rules. There's no, just start. And then also be authentic, because you're going to have to live up to whatever you post and say. So just make sure that you believe in what you're saying, because that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Nike had something right there with just do it. Just get it done. Just do it. Yeah. That's excellent. This next one comes from Danielle. She wanted to ask, did you ever feel intimidated being a woman in the energy space? And if so, what did you do to kind of feel more comfortable or combat that?
I can answer that, being in the field or even just in meetings, we're usually always the only women. It's just kind of the way it works, right? We're outnumbered. But I think it's really how you position that yourself. You can look at it in a negative way, but you can look at it in a positive way. And I've chosen to always look at it in a positive way. If you think about it, most of the time you're trying to stand out in general, right? You want to dye your hair different colors. You want to wear something different. Right? It's what nature is. It's like you want to stand out. In oil and gas, when you're really the only woman, that's already taken care of for you. You're already special. And that's the way I always saw it, was I'm already ahead of everybody else because I'm the only woman on this team. I already have something going for me. And I just always chose to look at it in a positive way. And so far, I can only speak to my own experience, but it's always been positive in my end. I've always had really helpful mentors, really helpful teams. The men that I've worked with have always treated me as if I was one of their daughters or a sister, or, so it's always been positive on my side. I've never really felt like, I was less than anybody. I always felt like I did have a seat at the table.
I have to second Massiel. This is my first time. I work for Baker Hughes now, and my first time actually working with a team where there's more women involved. All my other teams, I've always been the only woman, and I've loved it, actually. I felt like the guys really respected me, and that they listened to my voice, and I really never had an issue. So I would say it's more or less being comfortable in yourself and making sure that you have the opportunity to speak out. And a lot of times it has to do a lot with your manager. So if you feel that uncomfortable or intimidated and it has to do with maybe the management, my advice to you would be to seek out a mentor or somebody to help you figure out how to combat that, because I do think a lot of it has to do with who you work for or who your direct report is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. A good strong team can make all the difference in the world. That's what I've learned for sure, that in my experience. And this last question, I want to preface it a little bit with, we know nobody has an exact crystal ball or can see the future, but Kiko on LinkedIn was wondering, based on y'all's experience, what do you think is next for the oil and gas or maybe the energy industry as a whole? If you could look a little bit, or what y'all see coming next, what would you think?
I wish I had that $1 million question. It's hard to say. One thing that I will say is oil is not going anywhere. I think a lot of people are always worried about us just having 5 or 10 more years left. And something that we've listened to a lot on the podcast is when everybody was starting, it almost seems like that when they're sharing their stories, they said, I graduated and it was the biggest downturn and everybody thought I was crazy for going in oil and gas because it wasn't going to be an industry. And, they're telling these stories, and that was 20, 30 years ago. And it almost feels like we're going through that right now too, but we're not going to go anywhere. One thing that we do see, and Jamie can talk about this, is definitely the energy transition. That is happening. That is real. And I love being part of it. I love that our companies and that oil and gas is the one that's in charge to creating a better future and a greener future. So why not be in oil and gas when we are going to be part of the change, and we're the ones that are really going to make this industry better? So I definitely do see a big mixture of, greener energy coming in the future.
I think there's a huge opportunity in this space. So I just recently moved over into a emissions management role, and I moved over to that role because this is the first time that we have the opportunity to be on the forefront of something huge. There's not many times in life where you get to be in a green space where you're still defining what that is. So I think all the young talent, all the older talent within oil and gas, we all need to come together in this space, because there's a huge change going on, and with this change will bring massive amounts of opportunity, and I'm seeing it today. I've been in this role for 5 months. I've learned more than I ever have. I've been selling OFS products for over 10 years or 9 years now, I guess. So it's definitely coming, and I would say look for those energy transition type roles. Look for the roles within emissions engagements and management, because it is going to be the wave of the future, and it's going to be something that our oil and gas sector is going to have to comply with. And I think that the more that we get involved in that and understand it, the better we're all going to be. But we're on the cusp of something huge. I mean, I'm really excited about it, and I think it's really going to help prolong, the oil and gas sector. And I think we have decades to go. So it's a great opportunity within this space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's excellent advice. Excuse me, excellent advice. And thank you so much for being willing to take some of our audience questions. And thank you to everybody for submitting those questions. I'll hand it back over to Mai.
Thanks, Shelby. As you guys are talking about your story a little bit more, are there any publications, any programs, anything you guys follow that keeps your finger on the pulse that maybe our viewers, as well as even myself, would love to just be more aware of? I think information is so vast. So what are some of the publications and stories that you guys follow?
So I would say a lot of, outside of the industry. And it's funny because we generally just go outside of the industry because it's more flashy, it's cooler, it's funner, it kind of like fits more of our style. But we look at that and we're like, how do we bring that back into oil and gas? Mm-hmm. For example, the event March 4th, there's a huge group of women who do this in Houston, but they're in real estate, or they're in just different really fun industries in Houston. And we look at their brunches and we're like, I wish we could be part of that. Why don't we have that? So it's been really fun to just look on Instagram, look on social media, TikTok, and see what the rest of the world's doing. And there's such a big open space in oil and gas. And we're like, okay, how do we bring that event here? How do we bring all of those fun things that other women are doing and bring it into our, into our industry? So I don't have anything great for oil and gas except for the awesome Inside Out Horizon that goes live on NOV. That's where you can get all your information. But yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, Massiel and I share all day long LinkedIn, Instagram posts. I would say that for a lot of the industry related stuff, we do a lot on LinkedIn. So, I mean, we follow a lot of feeds with ESG, energy transition, women in diversity, women leaders. We tag those, we follow them, and we share them back and forth all the time. And that's how we stay in tune with like kind of good guest ideas.
Yeah.
We also work with like other conferences like Heart, Doug. We're going to be working with a energy transition conference. We'll be announcing that soon. So it's really just staying involved, but then also it's very important, especially for those in oil and gas, to also understand what the outside world's doing, because they have a lot of great ideas that we can bring into our industry. And to Massiel's point, that's exactly how we came up with the event. And we're going to have another event that's going to be even off the chain too. So, and we're using all of what's going on outside that is very popular to bring it in and make sure that we have that same vibe here in oil and gas.
I love that. And for you guys that are viewing, what they're referring to is a phenomenal women's networking brunch that sold out in a week. And so I'd love to hear that there is another one coming up, and it allows for us to bring individuals together and talk more about the energy space. Gosh, such good questions here. I do have one question that is nothing related to energy, but something that I really want to quiz you guys on, because you guys have been friends since fall of 2019. You've gone on Flip in a Barrel. Do you guys remember what each of you guys ordered on your first lunch together at Bella Green? This was a 4-hour conversation that led to the birth of this podcast. Do you guys remember what each other ordered?
I'm pretty sure we both got the chicken. Which one?
Chicken curry salad with the
salad. Yeah.
A classic.
We still go to Bella Green almost, I'd say, every 2 weeks. That's like our meeting spot. So we always eat that same salad.
I love it. I love it. Not that we're sponsored. Looking out for some sponsored ads here.
I know. Bella Green, come on.
Yeah.
But appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for telling your story and really empowering the energy space. You may not think this, or you may have, but the impact that you're making and changing myself and changing our viewership is vast. So thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and thank you so much to our audience for tuning in. We're live here every week, so we look forward to seeing you on the next show, and we will talk to you later. Bye.